The old recommendation where you want to delay allergen introduction and only introduce bland foods to babies, it was quite a kind of restrictive, not very fun way to approach starting solids. And that's kind of been blown on its head.
That was probably, when I look back at all things medical guidance, it is probably the biggest quote unquote mistake that was kind of made. And it's our job now to say, hey, we were wrong. Or when I say we, the medical establishment was wrong in terms of not having this research. And now we know.
Total 180 in the feeding recommendations that now we're saying no. And this is thanks to the LEAP study. But the LEAP study taught us that when we introduce these foods like peanut to babies early and often, we can reduce the risk, and this was in high-risk babies, the study, but by 86%.
Wow.
Which just blows my mind. 86%, we can reduce the risk of peanut allergy. We want kids to enjoy food, to have a healthy, positive relationship with food, and to enjoy eating because it's such an important, crucial part of growing and thriving.
Welcome to PedsDocTalk TV and this episode of the PedsDocTalk Podcast, where you can catch my amazing conversations with guests on the show here on my YouTube channel, or if you prefer audio only, wherever you access podcasts. I'm Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician, lactation consultant, and mom of two, and I'm here to uplift, support, and guide you so you can raise those incredible kids. Let's get to today's amazing conversation.
Today's guest is Malina Malkani, who is a pediatric registered dietitian, author, and single mom of three who is dedicated to helping parents feed their babies and kids with confidence, reduce the risk of food allergies, and raise adventurous eaters. Thank you so much for joining me today, Malina.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of your content for many years.
As am I, and congratulations, you have a new book out, Safe and Simple Food Allergy Prevention. It's out now, right?
I do. It's my book baby.
I was gonna say, it is a
Yeah,
labor
thank
of
you.
love to create those books. So tell us more about your why, why you love the work that you do, and maybe some inspiration about why you wrote that book about allergies.
Absolutely. In terms of my why, there's really two when I think about it. You mentioned before, I'm a single mom of three girls. The girls were all born within about 3.5 years of each other, and they're a little older now. They're doing great now, but when they were born, when they were babies, at the time, it really seemed like we were struggling with just about every feeding related issue that comes down the pike. And we, looking back, we weren't, but it certainly felt that way to me in the moment. From colic to problem reflux, trouble gaining weight, low milk supply. We had intractable thrush
Oh,
breastfeeding with all three babies. So it's really painful. Food allergies that were difficult to diagnose, and then picky eating. And so at the time, despite being a pediatric dietitian, I wasn't finding support systems and resources that were practical and that were helping me move through these issues in ways that I found were really helpful. So my life's work, my Instagram, my blog, all of the resources that I create are they're the resources that I wish that I would have had at the
yeah.
time. I think, I've seen a lot of your wonderful content that makes me think you can relate to that in a lot of ways. I see you doing that as well. Um, because, it was humbling for me as a pediatric dietitian, but no matter how much education and experience we have, feeding can be really difficult. We're so hardwired to nourish our babies. And when it doesn't go the way that we hoped, it can be really stressful. Yeah. So that was one. But second, and this is the why behind the book, which was born out of the first why, I have unfortunately seen firsthand in my private practice and then also in social media and connecting with followers there, how truly frustrating it can be for new parents when they realize that they didn't have access to food allergy prevention information
Hmm.
during the really short window of time in their baby's infancy when it was crucial for them to have it. And I will never forget sitting in an initial session with a family a couple of years ago. And the little boy was 12 months old and he had just been diagnosed with multiple food allergies. And they were really difficult to navigate. And despite having had severe eczema, little boy had severe eczema all through his infancy, which indicates high risk for food allergies. Well, I was talking to the parents, and at no point had the baby's healthcare providers and healthcare team mentioned food allergy prevention to the family.
Oh,
It was never mentioned. And the mom
yeah.
was just sitting there with tears running down her face, asking me, why hadn't this been brought up when it potentially, and it's not a guarantee, but it potentially could have made such a big difference in her son's health, but also in her own stress levels and in now being tasked with feeding a child and keeping him safe who has multiple food allergies. So that really has become front and center in my work, how difficult food allergies can be on families. They're stressful, they're expensive. And we have this wonderful evidence based way to prevent them, but it's not yet being widely implemented.
Yeah, and I will say I work with variety of different clinicians myself, right? And there are still some clinicians out there that although we know, and we're going to go through a little bit of that data and what we know, although we know that there is better ways to approach food allergies, which is early introduction, and not avoiding certain allergenic foods, until later, which was the old recommendation. There
Yeah.
are still clinicians out there that have not come up to date with the program here. And part of our job as pediatricians, I can only speak for myself and my profession, is to stay up to date on the most recent guidelines and why that research matters. And speaking with our colleagues in, as dietitians or food allergists and saying, hey, what is the recommendation now? And, the food allergy prevention is the reality is early introduction is better, which we'll get into, but it is hard to hear. I definitely, for myself, try my best to stay up to date. And that's why I have this platform, which in a way has forced me to continue to stay up to date, even though, even though I was already doing it, it's like built-in CME. I describe it, right? Continuing medical education,
Yeah.
having an online platform, and being inspired like you were, from the experiences that you've had to create this online education. But you mentioned, going into risk factors. You did allude to eczema, which I know that that is a risk factor. But explain to everyone listening how a parent can know if their baby is considered high risk or low risk for developing food allergies, and what we know so far with that information.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because it's not such an intuitive thing to equate severe eczema during infancy necessarily with risk for food allergies. But severe eczema is considered the strongest risk factor for food allergies. Babies with a previously diagnosed food allergy and or mild to moderate eczema are also considered to be at somewhat increased risk. It's interesting having a family history of allergic disease in one or both parents, not siblings,
Yeah.
but parents has historically been considered a risk factor, a much, much smaller one, although newer research does not suggest that. So it's interesting. It has to do with the dual allergen exposure hypothesis, which theorizes that when allergens are entering through broken skin, they have a much greater risk of training the immune system to think that those allergens are dangerous.
Hmm.
Whereas if we can get those allergens in orally, early and often, and sort of train the immune system that those proteins are safe, then there's less of a risk of the allergy the food allergy for developing. But I think it's really important for all parents to not make the mistake of thinking that food allergy prevention during infant feeding is only for those high risk babies, for babies
Right.
with severe eczema, because about a quarter of babies who develop food allergy never even had eczema to begin with. So that's what I'm hoping to do with the book is food allergy prevention needs to be a part of the process of starting solids for every baby, no matter the level of risk. And I'm hoping that this will kind of bring the introduction of allergens into the conversation around starting solids and baby-led weaning, baby-led feeding for everybody to just sort of make it front and center when we think about the process of starting solids at around that 6-month mark.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned about the fact that it is not just risk factors, right? I know I mentioned, what are the risk factors? Eczema being one of them. And you talked about family members having allergy disease. But you're right. I mean, I see families coming in multiple times that are like, nobody has anything. And I don't know what happened here. And I think that is still an area of big research, right? Why are these children, the children that have no family history of food allergies or any sort of allergy issue, and now
Yeah.
developing these things. And I think there's so much layers of research that, in the allergy world that's still coming out. But what are ways that we can reduce that risk from food allergies from developing in babies? And I know there's obviously a big research study out there, and what has changed the narrative for all of our education out there. But how can we start by doing this reduction of risk?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I should start by saying that there are no guarantees.
Yes.
And I said this too. I hope it was comforting for the mom that I was talking to who was so sad that no one had brought up food allergy prevention. The reality is we can do everything, quote unquote, right, and
Yes.
introduce early and often and consistently and still end up with a food allergic child. It's a very nuanced area of medicine and of pediatric nutrition. There's a lot we don't know. But what we do have, like you just mentioned, is new research that guides us on how to feed babies during infancy in a really practical way, which I love as a dietitian and as a recipe developer, where we're offering top allergenic foods like peanut and egg early, often, and consistently, and of course, in baby-friendly forms. So in forms that they can eat, starting at around 6 months of age, or sometimes even a little bit earlier. And like I mentioned, and I will pound this on the table until probably until the day I die at this point, but there's just a really short window of time during infancy when it's most effective. So it's really important for caregivers not to miss it. The most robust research we have is on peanut. And
Mhm.
that's thanks to a 2015 study, which I think is the one you were probably just alluding to. It was a
Yeah.
randomized controlled clinical trial called the Learning Early About Peanut or LEAP study. I love this study.
Me too. It's fascinating.
It's a great study, right? And it turned everything on its head because, like you mentioned, and when my daughter just turned 15, my oldest, and when she was a baby, the recommendation was do not introduce top allergenic foods until 1, 2, or even 3 years of age. And isn't that it's
Yeah.
a total 180 in the feeding recommendations that now we're saying no. And this is thanks to the LEAP study. But the LEAP study taught us that when we introduce these foods like peanut to babies early and often, we can reduce the risk, and this was in high risk babies, the study, but by 86%,
Wow.
which
Yeah.
like just blows my mind. 86% we can reduce the risk of peanut allergy. So it's compelling, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I will be linking the entire study for anyone and kind of like a summary of the study because I think it is extremely fascinating. And it's what, like Melina said, like turned the entire guidance in a 180. And it was when I was in training that was the new narrative and the new educational piece. And so, like I said earlier, when you meet clinicians who are like on their website, when I was searching for jobs down here in Florida, and I would go to the website, and one of the things was, delay introduction. I was like, oh, probably not a good idea to join a practice that is not up to date on
Oh.
evidence based. I mean, I could be the light that changes the way they teach, but you're right. I mean, it was very outdated advice, and I think all of us can admit that it was probably the cause of a lot of issues, meaning a lot of allergenic issues because of that outdated advice that needed modern, research to kind of switch that. But yeah, that was probably when I look back at all things medical guidance, it is probably the biggest quote unquote mistake that was kind of
Yeah.
made. And it's our job now to say, hey, we were wrong. Or when I say we, the medical establishment was wrong in terms of not having this research. And now we know. And it is our
Yeah.
job to be up to date, like we talked about.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard to flip. It's such a 180, especially like if you have aunts or your grandmother or your mom or something is helping you feed your baby and
Yeah.
suddenly they were taught something completely different when they were feeding children. So it's like trying to steer a huge ship around. It can take some time and it can take a lot of education. Um that's what I'm hoping this book will be is when people are wondering, well, if I have a pediatrician who is recommending delayed allergen introduction or is not recommending that I introduce these foods, and you don't know what to say, but it's not sitting right with you because you're educated and hearing other things from Dr. Mona or from
Yeah.
me on Instagram. You take the book, take it with you and say, this is an evidence-based up-to-date guide that says otherwise. Can we talk about it?
I love that advocacy piece, right? Because I get it. Like it is it is our job as clinicians to be up to date, and yet in all aspects, right? I speak about so many different things, whether it's sleep, cough and cold, food allergies, and I'm always trying to say, hey, if you're not being heard, or if you feel like you've heard this and it's not what is in line, advocate for yourself, like you said, because there is obviously research to back this up that we're talking about. When you talk about early, often, and consistent, right? You mentioned about the early introduction of these foods, and you can use peanut as an example. What does that mean to you when you guide families? How do you make this in an easy to understand way where parents aren't feeling overwhelmed but understand the importance of it? And why is this early, often, and consistent important for families to know?
Great question. So, by early, what we're meaning is around 6 months of age, not necessarily on the 6 month birthday. And that's where it can get kind of tricky. We want to look for those signs of readiness for solid foods. But once babies are developmentally ready for solid foods, sometimes that happens a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And if that's okay, talk to your pediatrician, get the go ahead that your baby is ready for solid foods. Sometimes earlier, between 4 and 6 months, can be advantageous, more advantageous from a food allergy prevention perspective. Um, but once an allergen has been introduced and tolerated, it's really important to keep it in the baby's diet consistently to help maintain that tolerance. Because the immune system, our systems don't like it during infancy when we introduce an allergen once and
Yeah.
then assume the baby's not allergic if there's no reaction. And that's a piece of this food allergy prevention kind of puzzle that a lot of families forget. And it's another thing I'm pounding on the table about is it's it's um it's not enough to introduce once and then just
Right.
be like, okay, now my job is done. Again, the most robust research we have is on peanut, but we have really good research on egg as well. So if you're a parent and you're looking for kind of a good first step here, prioritizing peanut and egg, the early introduction of peanut and egg is a really good place to start. The other top allergens, and there are nine. There are nine top allergens in the US. They are responsible for over 90% of all food allergies, and those include milk, tree nuts, fish, eggs. Sorry, I said eggs, wheat, shellfish, and sesame. But we don't have as much research on those allergens.
Yeah.
That being said, there's really good reason to believe that as more becomes available and more is being conducted regularly, we'll learn that the early and frequent exposure to those foods is protective as well. And some of the research that I really love in this area is coming out about diet diversity during infancy, which actually there's some really, we need more, but there's great research showing that a diverse diet during infancy may lower a child's odds of developing a food allergy during the first decade of life by a third. So,
Love it.
which is another mind blowing one.
Yeah. And food diversity, you mean not just with allergenic foods, but all types of foods?
All types of foods,
I love it.
variety. And that's helpful from a nutritive perspective
Yeah,
anyway,
I was just gonna say, I'm like, that's
right?
also great from a selective eating standpoint, right? Early
And
introduction of just
selective eating,
variety.
yeah.
Yeah, so many benefits there.
Yep, like killing a lot of oops, I just
Yeah.
bumped my microphone. Hitting a lot of birds with one stone, which is really great. And so if you're a family who eats the foods I just mentioned, the top allergenic foods in your family and in your culture, it's a really good idea to start feeding them to your baby early and often
Yeah.
as well at around 6 months of age.
I really agree with that. And, I have always been on the bandwagon of introducing spices from an early age and not like a five-alarm chili to your baby, but like I'm Indian. And so we eat a lot of exotic spices for a lot of people, right? We do a lot of turmeric, a lot of, different chili powders and things like that. And we don't make separate meals for our daughter or our son growing up. Obviously, if it was very spicy, yeah, because they can't tolerate the very, very spicy level. But from when you think about it from an immune system aspect and also the gut is getting introduced to so many good bacteria if you introduce variety of food, right? And that's going to benefit the immune system. Is there a reason why we see that diversity of food, not just allergens, can help prevent allergenic foods? Does it have to do with the good bacteria that's developing or, supporting the immune system, or do we not know the actual reason yet?
If there is a why behind that, I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure it's settled science at this
Yeah,
point about what it is. We know that the microbiome has a lot to do with food allergy, but we don't know how to manipulate it
right.
yet, specifically in such a way that we can prevent food allergy. And some of the research around probiotics as a food allergy prevention tool has been really disappointing. So there's a lot we don't know, but I think if we can boil it, what we do know is that there's probably a great benefit to food allergy prevention in terms of diet diversity. And then,
Yeah.
like you said, we know that if we're introducing a variety of different foods to babies and kids early on, then they're more likely to enjoy those foods later. So from a picky eating prevention perspective, there may be a benefit there too. And there's just so many other benefits
Yeah.
to introducing
There's
diet
no harm in what we're
diversity.
saying to do, right? Like there's
Yeah,
no enjoy it.
yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
exactly,
And I
exactly.
think, and I to the point about the research around that, I think it's so hard with research surrounding allergies and gut health and all of that to fully make a great study that doesn't have any bias or confounding variables because there are so many variables that make our microbiome, right? There are so many things to consider, right? Is it genetics? Is it the foods that we eat? Is it the environment that we're in? So, when people are hearing like, well, what is the data? What do we know? We have this great LEAP study about, food allergenic exposure, but like what you're talking about, the diversity of food potentially preventing, or sorry, let's say reducing the incidence of food allergy, it makes sense to me. Like, even though there's no research in my brain, I'm like, well, yeah, because your body is getting introduced diverse foods and this is only going to serve in a positive way. But yeah, to be transparent, there's no data to show that, but I'm no doubt that there might be a study coming out or something even close to it to kind of explain the whys behind that, because that's the
Yeah,
negative about evidence-based medicine, is that we don't always have the perfect
yeah,
study, like not always. And we do. And, I love being able to share that and have us talk about that. But so much of it is, well, is there a harm to this? No, I think diversifying a palate is a beautiful thing, like you're saying, for so many various reasons.
yeah, and I like it too because it's actionable.
Yes.
It doesn't leave us with nothing to do. It leaves us with something actually really delicious and kind of connecting for families and fun and exciting. We don't have to introduce the same foods over and over. We can really get creative during infancy with babies in terms of what we're providing, and that has long-lasting potential benefits just from the solidifying of a family perspective. That there's no downside to that. Whereas the old adage, or the old recommendation where you want to delay allergen introduction and only introduce bland foods to babies, it was quite a kind of restrictive, not very fun way to approach starting solids, and that's kind of been blown on its head.
Yeah.
So from a feeding perspective and a bringing babies into family meals earlier on and connecting with them over food, this is really positive, wonderful advice, which I love.
I love it. And I think, I look at three major stressors for parents with food, right? So we're already obviously talking heavily about food allergens, right? People are afraid of their child having a food allergy and them not knowing what to do. And I have many other resources for that. I know your book will probably go into that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
okay. And then also, so there's that, the fear of allergy. Okay, well, I'm not gonna know what to do. I'm not gonna be near a hospital, whatnot. The other big thing is, what the heck do I eat? Like what
Ah,
the heck do I serve? Which we're talking about a little bit. And then the third major issue and stressor is choking, right? And I think we'll talk about a little bit about choking hazards, especially with allergenic foods. But what are
yeah.
some practical ways that we can build this into our everyday life, right? You said it perfectly, that this isn't about making this more stressful. We shouldn't have to think like, oh my gosh, I didn't introduce peanut and I'm supposed to introduce it every day and da da da. How can we just make this sustainable, but also follow that early, often, and consistent approach?
Yes, that was the biggest, nut to crack, pardon the pun, as I was writing this book. Because you can get stuck in the science of it, and then
Yeah.
trying to count the number of days that you've introduced all 9 allergens, and you start with, like, you start getting into math, and that's just not practical, especially when you have
Yeah.
multiple children and lots of people to feed and not easy. So that's what I strove to do with the book. I've in my private practice, I've spent so many years hearing from families that it's hard enough to get a meal on the table, let
Yes.
alone, right? I mean, well, all the different stressors that we have in our lives, different schedules, there's, work and there's activities, and it's hard, let alone keeping allergens in the diet once they've been introduced. So I created not only just a roadmap so that it's simple for families to introduce those allergens and showing them how to do so and modify them so that babies can safely eat them, but the book also contains 8 weeks of maintenance plans,
Nice.
meal plans. So you can just, if you just want someone to do all the thinking for you, you don't have to think about it. Here's the 80 recipes. I did all the recipe development, and I did the food photography myself as well. So I shot all the
Amazing.
recipes.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What a time investment into this. I'm so proud. I'm so proud of you. This is a great resource.
You. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. I wanted to do the food photography because I wanted to show people how it's not just the meal prepared for the baby, but it's also the meal that you're then serving to your toddler and your school-age child and your whoever else is eating with you. One meal for everybody. That
Yeah.
that was the goal. As a mom of three, I don't it's real, the families that come to me in my private practice are the ones who are often exhausted because they're making different meals for everybody who have
Yeah.
different dietary needs. And that's a really quick recipe for burnout. So the book will prevent that. It's got 80 recipes, 8 weeks of meal plans. Just follow that and you'll make sure that you're hitting all the allergens. Um, and I think that my girls were my recipe testers. They are now 11, 13, and 15. So they are brutally honest.
I love it. The best critics are teenage girls. I love it. Or preteen girls. They will tell you. I love it. That's
That
it.
is the
You
truth.
did great quality testing there and good demographic.
Oh boy.
That's so good. I think, I love that. I think that, people I never use any, like, meal planning, and there are benefits to having that, and I think especially when we're dealing with this, well, I wanna do it right, I wanna do it where I'm providing the best, option for my children. It's so nice to have this resource and also just the education behind it, right? It's not just recipes, it's why this is important. What do we know about the food allergy? So I think, that, like I said, I think this book is a great resource for that. And, lastly, about the choking hazards, especially peanuts, right? Giving an example of peanuts, what are some ways to modify that for the parent that's like, well, I don't know how to introduce peanut. Like, I can't give them a whole nut, or can I? Like, what is that sort of guidance? And do you have that information in your book as well?
Yes, it is
Mhm.
definitely in the book,
Nice.
all 9 allergens, how to introduce them. It's funny because peanuts, they don't sound like the obvious first food or early food for babies, but they're actually really nutrient dense. Lots
Yeah.
of nutrients for babies. Iron and zinc are so key during infancy. We do need to modify them, though, as you mentioned, because whole nuts and also globs of peanut butter
Yes. People
are
don't know that.
they
Ah.
don't.
Yeah.
I know they, and it's so yummy as just put a spoon in the peanut butter jar and have a bite, but that would be not safe for a baby because it can very easily plug the airway. That's what we're worried about. So an easy way to do it is just take a couple of teaspoons of smooth peanut butter. We don't want the crunchy one because it can have larger pieces of nuts
Mhm.
that also would pose a risk. Just mix it into like an oatmeal or a familiar puree, an applesauce, something that your child likes. Or you can just do it plain and thin it out with a little bit of breast milk or formula and feed it on a spoon. For baby-led weaning, if you want to do it as a finger food, you can just put a thin layer of smooth peanut butter on a piece of toast or a teething cracker or something that your child can self-feed. And then there's lots of recipes in the book like peanut apple fritters and mascarpone peanut butter melts that are frozen.
Ooh, love it.
Yummy little ways to
Yeah.
just build peanut butter into the diet in other ways once it's been introduced.
Well, I love it. I'm so excited that your book is out. I think, again, it's going to be a great resource. And I love the evidence, but also the practical, making this not a annoying process, but an actually enjoyable process, which I've always felt like when we lose the joy in basic parenting things like feeding, mealtime, all of that, we need to reevaluate, right? It does not have to be this awful, stressful experience, which I think some parents tend to navigate towards. And so I hope this book and this resource and our conversation has helped parents in that way.
I hope so too. I love that. That's such a key piece in the process of starting
Hmm.
solids. There used to be that adage, food before one is just for fun.
Yeah.
I think we can put that to rest now. We can, we know that it's about a lot more than fun, but it's also about fun. Just
Yeah.
like you just mentioned, and we have to have the fun piece because we want kids to enjoy food, to have a healthy, positive relationship with food, and to enjoy eating because it's such an important crucial part of growing and thriving.
Yeah. And, part of the PDT podcast is I love to share all of this educational information, and I like to leave our listeners with some uplifting message from our guests. So, for everyone listening, what would be your uplifting final message for everyone tuning in today?
Oh gosh. Well, do the two or three things. First of all, if you're a parent and you've just had a baby, just start the conversations with your pediatrician about food allergy prevention
Mhm.
early. That way you're not blindsided. It doesn't come, it comes up quickly. So by the time it's time to start solids and start introducing allergens, it doesn't surprise you. Second, once you've established feeding, just get the show on the road with allergens.
Yeah.
They're wonderful, minimally processed, nutrient dense foods, all of them. So they're foods that your baby can enjoy that you can enjoy with them and don't delay. And third, if you want to know more about my book, if you want to sample some of the recipes and take a look at it, you can go to foodallergypreventionbook.com. And there's a lot of information there for you. You can see some of the pictures of the recipes there. And please connect with me at my Instagram, Healthy Mom, Healthy Kids. I love answering nutrition questions there and connecting with followers.
Thank you. I will be attaching all of those resources to our show notes, including her social media handles. So, like we talked about, just definitely check her out there. Check out the book. If you are past this stage, but you know that this book will be useful for a family member in your life that may be starting that feeding journey, definitely send it as a gift. And I really enjoyed having you on, Melina. And I'm so excited for your book to come out into the world and be here for everyone to have and to consume. No pun intended.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mona. You're the best. I appreciate
Thank you for
it.
coming on. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you love this conversation, make sure to hit that thumbs up sign, share this episode on your social media channels, and subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all future episodes and our weekly educational videos. Have questions or comments? Make sure to comment below, and I'll see you all next time. Stay well, stay loved, and keep on shining.